I'm Jennifer, 28 female. I live in a small, cozy apartment in the city with my husband, Jonathan. By day, I'm a graphic designer, spending my hours translating ideas into visual stories for clients. By night, I was, until recently, a happy newlywed, building a life with the man I thought was my perfect partner. This story is about how a single person, my sister-in-law, driven by a venomous jealousy I failed to see, tried to burn my entire world to the ground. She almost succeeded, but she underestimated me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The memory of my wedding day should be a soft, sun-drenched haze of happiness. For the most part, it is. I remember the scent of peonies and roses that my mother-in-law, Sophie, had so lovingly arranged. I remember the look in Jonathan's eyes as I walked down the aisle, a mixture of awe and adoration that made my heart feel like it could float away. I remember the laughter of our friends, the warmth of my father's hand, the slightly too long but heartfelt speech from Jonathan's father, Miles. But threaded through these golden memories is a stark, jarring image that still has the power to make my breath catch. The sight of my sister-in-law, Holly, standing in the front pew, dressed in a floor-length, lace-adorned white gown. It wasn't just white, it was bridal. The kind of dress a woman might choose for her own understated, elegant ceremony. It was a silent, screaming statement in a room filled with soft pastels and respectful blues and grays. From the moment I saw her, a cold knot formed in my stomach, an unease that I tried to dismiss as pre-wedding jitters. But it wasn't. It was an instinct, a warning flare that I was too naive, too happy, and too trusting to heed. Jonathan and I had been together for 4 years before we got engaged. Our relationship was the kind of easy, comfortable love that felt like coming home. He was a financial analyst, grounded and logical, a perfect balance to my more creative and sometimes chaotic energy. His family had welcomed me from the start. His parents, Sophie and Miles, were warm and kind. Sophie, a retired florist, treated me like the daughter she never had, always showing up with a new plant for my apartment or a recipe she thought I'd like. Miles, a retired lawyer, was quieter but had a sharp wit and a clear love for his son. He and Jonathan would spend hours debating everything from politics to sports, and he'd always wink at me, saying, "Thanks for giving him someone else to argue with." And then there was Holly. Holly was Jonathan's older sister, a successful public relations executive who was, by all accounts, impressive. She was beautiful, intelligent, and commanded attention whenever she walked into a room. In the beginning, I was eager to get to know her, to build the sisterly bond I'd always wished for. I complimented her career, asked for her advice, and made every effort to include her in our lives. She was always perfectly polite, but there was a coolness, a distance I could never quite bridge. Her smiles never seemed to reach her eyes, and her compliments always felt like they had a hidden barb. When I excitedly told her about a new freelance project I'd landed, she'd say something like, "Oh, that's so nice that you have a little hobby to keep you busy." It was subtle, a slow drip of condescension that I brushed off as her just being reserved or perhaps a little socially awkward despite her profession. Jonathan adored his sister. To him, she was brilliant and ambitious, and he was her biggest cheerleader. "Holly's just very focused," he'd say whenever I'd gently mention an awkward interaction. "She's had to be tough to get where she is. She doesn't mean anything by it." I wanted to believe him. I loved him, and I wanted to love his family, so I chose to see Holly through his eyes. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that I was misinterpreting her. The wedding planning was where the first real cracks in her polished facade began to appear. She offered to help, an offer I gratefully accepted, thinking it would be a good bonding experience. It was the opposite. Every decision I made, she questioned. The venue was a little rustic for Jonathan's taste. The caterer I loved was fine if you like that sort of common food. My dress, a simple A-line gown I'd fallen in love with, was sweet but not exactly memorable. The bridesmaid dresses were a particular point of contention. I had chosen a beautiful dusty blue color. Holly, as the maid of honor, declared it would wash her out. She insisted on a different shade, a slate gray. To keep the peace, I agreed. It wasn't the hill I wanted to die on. But looking back, I see it for what it was: a power play, a way to assert control over my day. The subject of her own dress came up. A few weeks before the wedding, we were all at Sophie and Miles's house for Sunday dinner. I casually asked Holly if she'd found a dress yet. She smiled, a tight, unreadable expression on her face. "Oh, yes, I found the perfect thing. Don't you worry about it." I didn't. Why would I? It never, in a million years, occurred to me that she would deliberately try to upstage me. The morning of the wedding was chaotic and joyful. My bridesmaids and I were a flurry of hairspray and champagne in the bridal suite. The mood was light, excited. Then Holly arrived. She swept into the room, and a hush fell over us. She was wearing the white dress. My maid of honor, my sister-in-law-to-be, was dressed like a bride. My best friend, Sarah, was the first to speak. "Holly, what are you wearing?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Holly just shrugged, feigning innocence. "What? It's a white dress. It's a summer wedding." "It's a bridal gown, Holly," Sarah shot back, her protective instincts flaring. "Don't be ridiculous," Holly scoffed, turning to me. "You don't have a problem with it, do you, Jennifer? I mean, you're the bride. No one's going to be looking at me." Her eyes challenged me, daring me to make a scene. And I froze. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand she go home and change. But another, larger part of me, the part that had been conditioned for years to keep the peace and avoid confrontation, just shut down. I was minutes away from walking down the aisle. The last thing I wanted was a huge, family-altering fight. So I swallowed the anger and the hurt, forced a smile, and said, "No, of course not. You look lovely." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. My bridesmaids stared at me, their expressions a mixture of pity and shock. The joyful bubble had been popped, replaced by a tense, uncomfortable silence. Walking down the aisle, all I could see was her. She was standing next to Jonathan, and for a horrifying second, from a distance, they looked like the couple getting married. The sight sent a fresh wave of humiliation through me. During the ceremony, I could feel the whispers rippling through the guests. I saw the confused and angry looks on my family's faces. I saw Sophie's hand go to her mouth in shock and Miles's jaw tighten. They were horrified, but Holly stood there, a serene, triumphant smile on her face, as if she had achieved exactly what she set out to do. She had planted a seed of discord on the happiest day of my life, and I had let her. That decision, born of a desire for peace, would prove to be one of the most costly mistakes of my life. It was the first battle in a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The reception was a blur. Jonathan, completely oblivious to the sartorial drama that had unfolded, was on cloud nine. He held my hand, kissed my cheek, and told me over and over again how beautiful I was and how happy he was. His joy was so pure, so infectious, that for a while I could almost forget the white dress and the cold knot in my stomach. I danced, I laughed, I drank champagne, and I tried to push the image of Holly out of my mind. But she was impossible to ignore. She made sure of it. During the speeches, Miles, a man of few but well-chosen words, gave a touching toast. He spoke of his pride in his son and welcomed me to the family with a warmth that felt genuine and comforting. "Jennifer," he'd said, raising his glass, "you have made our son happier than we have ever seen him. Welcome to the family. We are all the richer for having you." The room was filled with applause and happy tears. Then it was Holly's turn. As the maid of honor, she was expected to give a speech. She stepped up to the microphone, looking radiant and utterly shameless in her white dress. A hush fell over the room. I held my breath, bracing myself. "Wow," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "What a day. Jonathan, my little brother, I've watched you grow up and I've always been so protective of you." She paused, looking directly at him. "I always wanted to make sure you found someone who was truly worthy of you, someone who would support you, challenge you, and stand by your side as an equal." The words hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meaning. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it. The implication was clear: I was not that person. She continued, "When Jonathan first told me about Jennifer, I was, I'll admit, a little skeptical. A graphic designer? It all sounded a bit flighty. Jonathan is so practical, so grounded. I worried he needed someone on his level. I could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on me. My cheeks burned. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably beside me, a small frown creasing his brow. He still didn't fully grasp what was happening, but he could feel the mood in the room shift. "But," Holly said, her voice softening into a tone of patronizing sweetness, "seeing them together, I realized that maybe Jennifer is exactly what he needs. Someone to take C. R of a project, if you will. She's a sweet girl, and I know she'll do her best to make him happy." She then raised her glass. "To the happy couple. May your life together be everything you hope for." It was a masterclass in passive aggression. To anyone not paying close attention, it might have sounded like a slightly clumsy but well-intentioned speech. But to me, and to everyone who knew her, it was a declaration of war. She had publicly dismissed my career, called me a project, and framed me as a helpless burden that her strong, practical brother had decided to take on. She had painted me as a charity case at my own wedding. The rest of the evening, she moved through the crowd like a shark, leaving a wake of unease. I watched as she spoke to Jonathan's relatives, her expression one of faux concern. Later, my cousin pulled me aside. "What is your sister-in-law's problem?" she asked, her eyes wide with indignation. "She was just telling Aunt Carol that she hopes Jonathan will be able to handle your financial situation and your artistic temperament." My financial situation was perfectly fine. I ran a successful freelance business. But Holly had planted a seed of doubt, painting me as a financially irresponsible artist. The most cutting moment came later, as I was waiting to toss the bouquet. Holly cornered me near the restrooms. The fake smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, hard disdain. "Having fun?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's my wedding day, Holly." "Of course I am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Enjoy it while it lasts. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. My brother is a wonderful, generous man, but he's also naive. He sees the good in everyone, even when it's not there. He needs a strong partner, Jennifer, not a burden." The word hit me like a physical blow. Burden. She had used it in her speech, and now she was throwing it in my face. "I am not a burden," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I love your brother, and he loves me." "Love isn't enough," she sneered. "You can't give him the life he deserves. You're a distraction, but don't worry, I'll be watching. I won't let you drag him down." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my heart pounding in my chest. The joy of the day had been completely overshadowed by her venom. On our honeymoon in Hawaii, I tried to talk to Jonathan about it. I explained how the white dress, the speech, and her private comments had made me feel. He listened, but he couldn't see it the way I did. "Honey, that's just Holly," he said, pulling me into a hug. "Her speech was a little off, I'll give you that, but she's not malicious. She's just awkward, and she's protective of me. She probably just wants to make sure I'm happy. She'll warm up to you, I promise." He didn't want to see it. He couldn't comprehend that his beloved older sister was capable of such deliberate cruelty. He saw a clumsy attempt at a toast. I saw a calculated character assassination. He saw a poor fashion choice. I saw a blatant act of disrespect. Arguing about it felt pointless. It cast a shadow over our honeymoon, creating the first real point of friction in our relationship. I realized with a sinking feeling that Holly was not just a problem, she was our problem. And Jonathan was blind to it. I decided to let it go, for his sake. I told myself that the wedding was over, that we were married now, and that Holly's opinion didn't matter. We would build our life, and she would eventually see how happy we were and back off. But Holly wasn't the type to back off. She had drawn her battle lines. The wedding wasn't the end of her campaign against me, it was just the beginning. The first year of our marriage was a delicate dance of avoidance and forced politeness. I did my best to be the bigger person, to extend olive branches that Holly would either ignore or snap in two. We'd invite her for dinner, and she'd cancel at the last minute with a vague excuse. When we did see her at family gatherings, she would alternate between ignoring me completely and making subtle digs that were designed to undermine me in front of Jonathan and his parents. She was an expert at framing her insults as compliments. "Jennifer, this casserole is so rustic. It's amazing how you can make something so tasty with such simple ingredients." Or, "That new client you landed sounds great. It must be so rewarding to have a creative outlet that also brings in a little extra pocket money." She always made me feel small, like my contributions were quaint and insignificant compared to her high-powered career in PR. Jonathan remained willfully blind. He saw his sister's quirks, but he refused to see her malice. Our conversations about her always ended in the same frustrating circle. "She's just not good with new people," he'd say. "It took her years to warm up to my best friend's wife." Or, "Her job is incredibly stressful. She's just letting off steam." He made endless excuses for her, and it started to feel like he was choosing her over me. The real trouble began about a year and a half into our marriage. Jonathan came home one evening looking worried. He worked as a financial analyst for a mid-sized investment firm, a job he was good at and enjoyed. "Everything okay?" I asked, handing him a glass of wine. He sighed, loosening his tie. "It's just work. There's a big promotion coming up for department head. It's between me and this other guy, David. I really want it, Jen. It would mean a huge step up for us." "You'll get it," I said confidently. "You're the smartest person in that office." He smiled, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. "I hope so. It's going to be a tough few months. I'll be working late a lot." True to his word, Jonathan began pouring all his energy into his job. He was gone before I woke up and came home long after I'd eaten dinner alone. I supported him completely, making sure he had everything he needed, offering encouragement, and trying not to complain about how little I saw him. I knew this promotion was important for our future. It was during this time that Holly's involvement in our lives took a more insidious turn. She started calling Jonathan constantly, ostensibly to offer him career advice. "My brother, the future department head," she'd say loudly enough for me to hear over the phone. "I have some thoughts on how you should handle the quarterly presentation. My PR expertise could really give you an edge." She began positioning herself as his unofficial career coach, his mentor. She'd take him out for strategy dinners that lasted late into the night. She'd email him articles on corporate leadership and send him motivational texts. On the surface, it looked like a supportive sister helping her brother, but I could feel something was off. It was too much. It was as if she was trying to insert herself into the very fabric of our shared goals to make his success her own. When I tried to talk to Jonathan about it, he was defensive. "She's just trying to help, Jen. She's one of the best PR execs in the city. Why wouldn't I take her advice?" "I'm not saying you shouldn't listen to her," I said carefully. "It just feels like she's everywhere. We haven't had a single conversation about this promotion that doesn't involve her opinion." "You're exaggerating," he said, shutting down the conversation. The first major crack in my own composure appeared a few weeks later. It was our second anniversary. I had made reservations at our favorite restaurant, the place where he had proposed. Jonathan had promised to be home by 7. At 7:30, he called. "Jen, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice strained. "I'm still at the office. We're in the middle of a crisis with the Henderson account." "Oh," I said, my heart sinking. "Okay, should I cancel the reservation?" No, I'll be there as soon as I can. I promise, it shouldn't be more than another hour." An hour later, he called again, then another. Finally, at 10 o'clock, he called to say he was just leaving. I told him to just come home. I had already canceled the reservation, blown out the candles on the small cake I'd bought, and put the champagne back in the fridge. He walked in the door just before 11, looking utterly exhausted. "I am so sorry," he said, pulling me into a hug. I wanted to be understanding, but the disappointment was a bitter pill. "It's our anniversary, Jonathan." "I know, and I feel terrible. It was just, Holly called with this idea for the Henderson pitch, and we started brainstorming, and I completely lost track of time." My blood ran cold. "Holly, she was at your office." No, on the phone. She was helping me rework the strategy. She's brilliant, Jen. I think she might have just saved the account. He wasn't just working late. He was working late with her, on our anniversary. The hurt was so sharp, so intense, it felt like a betrayal. So you missed our anniversary dinner because you were on the phone with your sister? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He finally seemed to realize how much he had messed up. Jen, it wasn't like that, it was work. No, Jonathan, I said, pulling away from him. That's what it was. You stood me up for her. She knew it was our anniversary. She did this on purpose. That's not fair, he said, his voice rising. She was helping me. She's supportive of my career, of our future. Maybe you should try being a little more like her. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and venomous. He had never, ever spoken to me like that. The shock of it was so profound that I couldn't even form a response. I just stared at him, my eyes welling up with tears. The look on his face told me he regretted it instantly. Jen, I didn't mean that. But he had said it, and he had meant it, at least in that moment. Holly's poison was working. She had successfully positioned herself as the supportive, intelligent partner in his career, while I was relegated to the role of the nagging, unsupportive wife. She had created a crack in the foundation of our marriage, and for the first time, I was terrified that it was something we wouldn't be able to repair. I went to bed that night feeling a deep, chilling loneliness. I was married to a man who was allowing his sister to stand between us, and I had no idea how to fight a ghost. The anniversary fight was a turning point. Jonathan apologized profusely the next morning, and I accepted, but something had shifted between us. A wall of defensiveness now surrounded any mention of Holly. The more I tried to point out her manipulative behavior, the more he dug in his heels, accusing me of being jealous and paranoid. Our home, once a sanctuary, now felt tense and fragile. I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew Holly's actions were deliberate, but I had no proof. It was all subtle digs, veiled insults, and helpful advice that seemed to drive a wedge between us. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, constantly questioning my own perceptions. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining the malice in her eyes? My salvation came from an unexpected source: Sophie, my mother-in-law. About a month after the anniversary incident, Sophie invited me for lunch. We met at a small cafe near her house. She was unusually quiet, stirring her tea with a troubled expression. "Is everything all right, Jennifer?" she finally asked, her kind eyes searching mine. "You seem distant lately, and Jonathan is so stressed." I hesitated, unsure of how much to say. I didn't want to sound like I was complaining or trying to turn her against her own daughter. But the loneliness and frustration were overwhelming, and looking into her genuinely concerned face, the dam broke. I told her everything. I told her about the white dress, the wedding speech, the constant undermining comments, the way Holly monopolized Jonathan's time under the guise of helping with his career, and the disastrous anniversary. As I spoke, I saw not surprise, but a deep, weary sadness in Sophie's eyes. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I was afraid of this," she said softly. "I am so sorry, Jennifer. You are not imagining it. That is Holly." The relief that washed over me was so intense it almost made me cry. I wasn't crazy. "Holly has always been difficult," Sophie continued, her voice pained. "She is intensely competitive, especially with other women. When she was in high school, she systematically destroyed the reputation of her best friend because that girl was named valedictorian over her. She has a cruel streak that Miles and we never knew how to manage. We hoped she would outgrow it." She sighed, a heavy, regretful sound. "When Jonathan met you, we were so thrilled. You are so good for him. You're kind and stable, and you make him so happy. And I think that's what Holly can't stand. She has always seen Jonathan as hers. She was the older sister, the one who advised him, the one he looked up to. She doesn't want to share that position. In her mind, you haven't just married her brother, you've stolen him." Hearing this was both validating and terrifying. It confirmed my suspicions, but also revealed the depth of Holly's obsession. "What about the promotion?" I asked. Do you really think she's just trying to help him? Sophie's expression darkened. Honestly, I don't know. Part of her probably does want him to succeed, but only if she can take credit for it. But another part of her, Jennifer, be careful. Holly doesn't do anything that doesn't benefit her in the end. Her words echoed in my mind for days. Be careful. I realized I couldn't just be a passive victim anymore. I had to find a way to protect my marriage and myself. I had to find proof of her manipulation, something Jonathan couldn't excuse or ignore. I started small. I began documenting every snide comment, every last-minute cancellation, every time she pulled Jonathan away for a strategy session. It felt petty, but I needed a record. The real breakthrough came from a moment of pure chance. One Saturday, Jonathan was at the office, and I was at home working on a design project. He had accidentally left his personal laptop at home, taking his work one instead. A notification popped up on the screen, a shared calendar alert from an account I didn't recognize. The alert was for a monthly strategy lunch. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the calendar. It was a shared calendar between Holly and someone named David. David. The name was familiar. He was the other guy at Joe Nathan's firm, the one who was his main rival for the promotion. My heart started pounding. Why would Holly have a shared calendar with her brother's direct competitor? I felt a pang of guilt, but I knew I had to look further. I opened his email. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I typed David's name into the search bar. There were a few emails, mostly innocuous office-wide memos. But then I saw one, from Holly to David, sent from her personal account to his. The subject line was Ray, Jay's blind spots. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. The email was long and detailed. In it, Holly was systematically outlining Jonathan's weaknesses. She pointed out his tendency to be overly cautious with high-risk investments, his occasional struggles with public speaking, and his lack of experience with a specific type of financial modeling software that their company was starting to use. He's brilliant, of course, she wrote, but he's predictable. If you can highlight your agility in these areas during your final presentation, you'll have a clear advantage. He'll never see it coming. Let's discuss more at our lunch next week. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't just manipulation, this was a calculated, deliberate act of sabotage. She wasn't helping Jonathan, she was feeding confidential information about his professional weaknesses to his rival. She was actively working to destroy the promotion she claimed to be helping him get. All of her late-night calls, her strategy dinners, her advice, it was all a front. She was gathering intelligence to use against him. I took out my phone and took pictures of the email and the shared calendar. My hands were trembling so badly I had to take them twice. This was the proof. This was the smoking gun. This was the undeniable evidence of her treachery. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the pieces clicking into place. The condescending comments, the wedding drama, the constant need to prove her superiority, it all stemmed from the same dark, twisted place in her psyche. She couldn't stand to see him happy and successful with me. If he got this promotion, it would be our victory, a step forward in the life we were building together. She had to prevent that at all costs, even if it meant betraying her own brother. The guilt I had felt about snooping on his laptop was replaced by a cold, hard anger. This was no longer just about me and my feelings. Holly had targeted our future. She had tried to sabotage my husband's career out of sheer spite and jealousy. The question now was what to do with this information. Simply confronting Jonathan with it would cause an explosion that could shatter his family. He would be devastated. But doing nothing was not an option. Holly had to be stopped. She had underestimated me. She thought I was a sweet, simple project. She had no idea how fiercely I would fight to protect the people I love. My plan began to form, not one of simple revenge, but of calculated exposure. Holly was a PR executive. Her entire career was built on image and reputation, and I was about to burn it all to the ground. For 2 weeks, I sat on the information, a coiled spring of fury and resolve. Showing the evidence to Jonathan immediately felt wrong. He was already under immense pressure at work, and dropping a bombshell like this proof that his adored sister was actively sabotaging him, would be emotionally devastating. It could derail his focus and jeopardize the very promotion he was fighting for. More than that, a direct confrontation would allow Holly to spin the narrative. She would claim I was the one who was manipulative, that I had hacked her accounts or fabricated the emails. In a he said, she said battle, Jonathan's lifelong loyalty to his sister would be a powerful force to overcome. No, a simple reveal wasn't enough. Holly didn't deserve a quiet family fallout. She deserved to be exposed in a way that would leave her with no plausible deniability. Her weapon was public relations, the careful crafting of image and perception. I decided to use her own tools against her. My first step was to gather more information. I needed to understand the full scope of her treachery. I used a simple password recovery trick on Holly's email, correctly guessing her security question, the name of her first pet, a cat named Duchess that Sophie had mentioned once. The guilt of this invasion of privacy was a distant hum beneath the roar of my determination. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. It wasn't just one email. It was a months-long correspondence with David. Holly had been feeding him information since the promotion was first announced. She had shared insights from her strategy sessions with Jonathan, twisting his ideas and presenting them as potential pitfalls. She had coached David on his presentation style, helped him network with key executives, and even drafted talking points for him to use in Meet. She was essentially running a covert PR campaign for her brother's rival. The most damning piece of evidence was a draft of an anonymous email she intended to send to Jonathan's boss a few days before the final decision. In it, she posed as a concerned colleague and raised questions about Jonathan's temperament and ability to handle pressure, citing fabricated instances of him becoming flustered and overwhelmed by his workload. It was a vicious, calculated attempt to poison the well and paint him as unstable and unfit for a leadership role. This was my endgame. This email was the key. My next step was to enlist an ally. I went to Sophie. I laid out everything for her on her kitchen table, the photos of the emails, the calendar appointments, the draft of the anonymous complaint. I watched her face crumble as the reality of her daughter's betrayal settled in. The sadness in her eyes was profound, but it was quickly replaced by a steely resolve that I had never seen before. I knew she was cruel, Sophie said, her voice shaking with a quiet rage. But this is monstrous, to do this to her own brother. She looked up at me, her eyes clear. What do you need me to do? I need Miles, I said. That evening, we sat down with Miles. Sophie explained the situation, and I presented the evidence. Miles, the retired lawyer, listened in silence, his face an unreadable mask. He read every email, examined every detail with a practiced, analytical eye. When he was done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The evidence is irrefutable, he said, his voice heavy. The IP addresses on the draft emails can be traced. The calendar is damning. She has been actively conspiring to commit corporate sabotage against her own brother. He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. You were right not to go to Jonathan immediately. This requires a more strategic approach. Together, the three of us devised a plan. It felt like a war room council, preparing for a battle that Jonathan didn't even know was being fought for him. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, the bait. Miles, using his old legal connections, had a friend in the tech industry do some digging. They discovered that David, Jonathan's rival, had a skeleton in his own closet. A few years prior, at his previous job, he had been formally reprimanded for falsifying expense reports. It hadn't been enough to get him fired, but it was a black mark on his record, a sign of questionable ethics. This was our leverage. Phase 2, the trap. The final presentations for the promotion were scheduled for a Friday. The decision was to be announced the following Monday. The plan was to let Holly send her anonymous email. We knew she would likely send it on the Thursday night before the presentation to maximize its impact. Miles's tech friend set up a discreet monitoring alert on the company's email server, waiting for an anonymous email regarding Jonathan to come through. Phase 3, the confrontation. We would not confront Holly alone. This couldn't be a family squabble. It needed to be official, undeniable, and public. The confrontation would take place on Monday morning in the office of Jonathan's boss, Mr. Harrison. Miles made a call to Harrison, who was an old acquaintance, and requested a meeting for Monday morning, stating only that it was a matter of extreme sensitivity regarding the integrity of the promotion process. He didn't give details, but the gravity in his voice was enough to secure the meeting. Sophie and I would be there, and we would bring Jonathan, who would still be completely in the dark. The days leading up to the presentation were the most stressful of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal. I wished Jonathan luck, helped him practice his presentation, and listened to him talk about the brilliant, last-minute advice Holly had given him, all while knowing she was sharpening the knife to stick in his back. It was an agonizing performance. On Thursday night, the alert came through. Miles texted me a single word. Sent. Holly had taken the bait. She had sent her poison pen email, a digital ghost that she thought would anonymously destroy her brother's chances. On Friday, Jonathan gave his presentation. He called me afterwards, sounding confident and relieved. I think it went really well, he said. David seemed a little off his game, though, kept looking at his phone. Little did he know, Miles had sent an email to David's personal account an hour before the presentation. It was simple and direct. It contained a screenshot of his correspondence with Holly and a copy of his old expense report reprimand. The message was clear. We know. Withdraw your name from consideration for the promotion, or all of this goes to HR and your current CEO. You have until 9 a.m. Monday. The net was woven. The trap was set. All we had to do was wait for Monday morning, for the moment when all of Holly's lies and manipulations would finally be brought into the light. Monday morning was cold and gray, a perfect mirror of the dread coiled in my stomach. I told Jonathan that his father had called a family meeting at his office to discuss a serious family matter before the promotion was announced. He was confused and annoyed, worried it would make him late, but he trusted his father, so he agreed to come. He had no idea he was walking into his own intervention. We met Sophie and Miles in the lobby of Jonathan's office building. Miles was a pillar of calm authority in a sharp suit. Sophie was pale but resolute, her hand clutching mine for support. Jonathan looked between us, his confusion mounting. What on earth is going on? Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost. We're just worried, honey, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Let's just go upstairs. We rode the elevator in tense silence. When we arrived at the executive floor, the receptionist showed us into Mr. Harrison's large corner office. He was already there, looking grim. The final piece of our plan was also in the room, sitting in a chair in the corner, Holly. Mr. Harrison had called her in for a synergy meeting to discuss PR strategies for the new department head. She had walked in, confident and smiling, only to find us. The color had drained from her face. She looked like a trapped animal. When Jonathan saw her, his confusion turned to relief. Oh, Holly, you're here too. Do you know what this is about? She just stared at him, her mouth opening and closing silently. Miles took control. He gestured for us to sit. Thank you for seeing us, Frank, he said to Mr. Harrison. As I mentioned, we have discovered some information that gravely concerns the integrity of your promotion process. He then looked at Jonathan, his expression a mixture of pity and resolve. Son, I'm sorry to do this to you here, but it was necessary. For the past several months, your sister has been actively conspiring to sabotage your career. Jonathan stared at his father as if he'd lost his mind. What, Dad? That's insane. Holly has been my biggest supporter. Has she? I said, my voice quiet but firm. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I looked directly at my husband. Or has she been feeding information about your professional weaknesses to your direct competitor, David? Jonathan's head snapped towards me. Jen, what are you talking about? You're letting your jealousy get the best of you. It's not jealousy, Jonathan, Miles cut in. He placed a folder on Mr. Harrison's desk. It's evidence. For the next 10 minutes, Miles laid out the entire sordid story with the cold, irrefutable logic of a seasoned lawyer. He presented copies of the emails between Holly and David. He showed the shared calendar. And then, he produced the piece de resistance, a printout of the anonymous email Holly had sent to Mr. Harrison on Thursday night, complete with the IP address traced back to her home office. As he spoke, I watched Jonathan's face. It was a slow, agonizing transformation from disbelief to confusion, then to dawning horror, and finally, to utter devastation. He looked at the emails, his own professional vulnerabilities laid bare and strategized against. He looked at the anonymous letter, the venomous words meant to paint him as unstable. And then he looked at his sister. Holly was trying to maintain her composure, but she was crumbling. Her PR mask was cracking, revealing the panicked, ugly truth beneath. "This is ridiculous," she stammered, looking at Mr. Harrison. "She's turned them against me. My brother's wife has always been obsessed with me. She clearly fabricated all of this." Mr. Harrison, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. His voice was cold as ice. "Ms. Evans," he said, addressing Holly, "is it true that your firm, Vanguard PR, has been on a paid retainer with David's family for the last 6 months?" The air in the room went still. Holly's jaw dropped. That was a piece of the puzzle even we hadn't uncovered. "It seems David's father hired your firm to mentor his son and ensure his professional success," Harrison continued, his eyes boring into her. "And it seems your idea of mentoring involved corporate espionage against your own brother." The final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a paid conspiracy. She hadn't just betrayed her brother for her own twisted emotional reasons, she had done it for money. Jonathan made a choked sound like he'd been punched in the gut. You did this for money," he whispered, his voice cracking. The question wasn't for Harrison, it was for Holly. That was the moment she broke. All the pretense, all the arrogance vanished. She just stared at her brother, her face a mask of guilt. Mr. Harrison stood up. "Well, this makes my decision quite easy. Jonathan, congratulations on the promotion. It was well-deserved, and frankly, you earned it despite this circus." He then turned his gaze back to Holly. "As for you, Ms. Evans, my company will be severing all ties with Vanguard PR, effective immediately. I will also be speaking with my legal team about this, and I suggest you leave my office." Holly stumbled out of the room without another word. The silence she left behind was heavy and painful. Jonathan sat motionless, his face pale, staring at the empty chair where his sister had been. Sophie was openly weeping, and Miles put a comforting arm around her. I went to Jonathan and put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry, Jonathan," I whispered. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it made my own heart ache. "You knew," he said, his voice hollow. "You all knew, and you didn't tell me." "We wanted to protect you," Miles said gently. "We had to make sure we had undeniable proof, so she couldn't twist it and make you doubt." Jonathan just shook his head, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. He stood up, walked out of the office, and didn't look back. The unraveling was complete. Holly's plot was exposed, but the victory felt hollow. I had won the war, but the collateral damage to my husband's heart was immense, and I didn't know if our marriage would survive it. The aftermath was not a celebration. It was a quiet, painful reckoning. Jonathan got the promotion, but he walked through the following weeks like a ghost. He was distant and withdrawn, shrouded in a grief so profound I didn't know how to reach him. He barely spoke to me, and he refused to speak to his parents. He felt betrayed not just by Holly, but by all of us for keeping him in the dark. Our apartment, once filled with laughter and easy conversation, was now suffocated by a heavy, oppressive silence. I gave him space. I didn't push or demand to talk. I just made sure he ate, I kept the apartment tidy, and I left him quiet notes telling him I loved him. I went to therapy to deal with my own anger and trauma from the situation. My therapist helped me understand that I had done the right thing, that I had acted to protect our family from a predator, even if that predator was one of our own. But it was Jonathan's journey to healing, and he had to walk it himself. The consequences for Holly were swift and catastrophic. Mr. Harrison's company was a major client for Vanguard PR. When they pulled their contract, citing unethical and potentially illegal behavior, other clients got spooked. An internal investigation was launched at her firm. When they discovered she had used company resources to carry out her vendetta and had been on a secret retainer, they fired her and filed a civil lawsuit against her for damages to the firm's reputation. But it got worse. David, in an attempt to save his own skin, cooperated fully with the investigation. He revealed that part of Holly's strategy involved accessing proprietary company information from Jonathan's firm. She had coaxed Jonathan into talking about projects and strategies at home, then fed that intel to David. That elevated the situation from a civil matter to a criminal one, corporate espionage. Holly was arrested. The scandal was quiet but devastating within the city's business community. A rising PR star, brought down by her own hubris and a plot against her own brother. Miles, despite his anger, did what he had to do as a father. He hired her a good lawyer. But he and Sophie made it clear that their support was logistical, not emotional. They visited her once in jail before the trial, and as Sophie later told me, Holly showed no remorse. She blamed me. She blamed her parents for always favoring Jonathan. She blamed everyone but herself. Her trial was short. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she pleaded guilty to a lesser charge in a deal her lawyer arranged. She was sentenced to 18 months in a low-security prison and ordered to pay significant restitution to her former firm. The day of her sentencing was the day Jonathan finally broke his silence. He came home from work, sat down on the sofa, and just said, "She's going to prison." "I know," I said softly, sitting down next to him, leaving a careful space between us. He was quiet for a long time. Then he turned to me, his eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "I've been so angry with you," he said, his voice raw, "and with my parents. I felt like you all treated me like a child, like I couldn't handle the truth." "We were afraid," I admitted. "We were afraid she would manipulate you, make you doubt what was right in front of your eyes, because she's done it before. I'm sorry if we hurt you. That was the last thing we wanted." He shook his head. "No, you were right. I wouldn't have believed you. I would have defended her. I would have made excuses. I've been doing it my whole life." He finally looked at me, his gaze full of regret. "She called you a burden, but the truth is she was the burden. On me, on our parents, on our entire family. And I was too blind to see it. You saw it from day one." He closed the space between us and took my hand. "Can you forgive me, Jen, for not listening to you, for not protecting you from her?" Tears welled in my eyes as I squeezed his hand. "Of course, I forgive you." That conversation was the beginning of our healing. We started going to marriage counseling to rebuild the trust that had been eroded. Jonathan reconnected with his parents, and together, they began to process the decades of Holly's toxic behavior that they had enabled and excused. It was a painful process, but it was a necessary one. We never saw or spoke to Holly again. When she was released from prison, she didn't contact us. We heard through a distant relative that she had moved to a different state, trying to start over. The door to her in our lives and in her family's life was permanently closed. 2 years have passed. Our life is quiet now and beautifully normal. Jonathan is thriving in his role at work. Our marriage is stronger than it ever was, forged in fire and rebuilt on a foundation of honesty and unbreakable trust. We recently bought a house in the suburbs, and Sophie is helping me plan a garden. Sometimes, the memory of that white dress or the venom in Holly's voice will surface, but it no longer has the power to hurt me. It's just a scar, a reminder of a battle that was fought and won. Holly tried to ruin my marriage and destroy my husband. Instead, she destroyed herself. She is out of prison now, but she is still jailed in a prison of her own making, cut off from her family, her career in ashes, alone with her bitterness and jealousy. As for me, I have my husband, a loving family, and a future that is bright and free of her poison. And that is the best revenge of all.